I don't know, Jeff, has it? I must have missed that.
Welcome back to the Commentary Box podcast. It's Arjun here, and today we have Kit, a man who's been all over the world, not for sports, but for other reasons. How you doing, Kit?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is the first video podcast as well that we're going to release, so it's a big thing.
Hello, everyone.
And I'm proud to have you on.
Thank you.
So let's kick off with some questions for you. Just to get to know a bit more about your sporting interests and things. So, what's your favourite sport and the team from that sport?
My favourite sport is probably football, and my favourite team is Manchester United.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to discuss that anymore because it's not great for me. How about your favourite stadium in the world from any sport?
I think it must have been the Emirates Airline Park. It's now called in Johannesburg.
Mm-hmm.
The sort of Lions and rugby stadium there.
Okay. Have you ever been?
Yeah, I watched New Zealand South Africa there in 2015, which was pretty incredible.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, that wasn't the World Cup. The World Cup was here then, wasn't it?
Yeah, no. Sorry, I think it was actually 2014. I mean, but yeah, it was a great game between the two.
And who's your greatest sportsman of all time?
Probably. Roger Federer. I think he's really up there. I've always respected him and what he's done for the sport and the way he's carried himself within it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I feel like we've had Roger Federer a few times, so it's hard to go against him as well, isn't it? So yeah, how about your favourite sporting moment ever?
Favourite sporting moment ever would probably be at that South Africa New Zealand game that I thought there was a Pat Lambie penalty that won the game for pretty much the last minute, and that was pretty incredible to witness. So yeah, I think that's definitely up there for me.
And finally, the one sporting event on your bucket list.
I think it's another rugby one, but it would probably be seeing the British and Irish Lions play on tour. I think that would be a massive thing to see, and it seems like a great atmosphere when people from Wales, Ireland, Scotland, and England sort of come together and support the one team.
Yeah, so I can imagine. Okay, so to kick off, we're in the middle of the transfer window. We spoke about the transfer window in my last podcast, and today we're going to discuss something that I feel like has progressed a lot in the last, say, 3 to 4 years, especially. But let's set a scene here and cast ourselves back to sort of the 2006, 2007 sort of period where, you had the big four teams of Man U, Chelsea, Arsenal, and Liverpool, right?
Yeah.
And what we want to discuss is pretty much why that's changed and how it's changing and the future of that and this so-called big six, big seven that's now become.
Yeah.
So I'd like to kick off by asking, the first question. Why do you think the league has developed from that sort of classic top four to a top six and possibly even a top 8 right now?
Well, I think for me, a lot of it comes down to money. That there's so much money available to just Premier League teams in general that I think you see before it seemed that Man United, Chelsea, Arsenal, Liverpool were the only teams that were able to spend sort of significant sums on multiple players. Some teams would buy the odd expensive player, but I think those teams were able to get the best players, the best talent, because they were able to pay the money for it. Whereas now you see teams such as sort of Man City that have joined that and Tottenham, but also teams like Leicester, and also are able to buy some considerable talent that has helped sort of propel them up and join that sort of elite group of teams.
So I can understand the likes of Man City who weren't in the classic top four. They had the big buyout. some of the other teams have had big investment, like Wolves, for example. But I think there are more factors to it, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think, certain teams, for example, I'll give you Leicester, who've done ridiculously well in the transfer market and with their recruiting and scouting. And I think that the information has also sort of developed in that sense, the scouting information. And in that sense, there's definitely finances involved. But I think the information available to teams is also a massive contributing factor.
Yeah, no, I think definitely you see like teams sort of in the lower league, teams like Brentford in the Championship and stuff like that are just completely using information to find players, and then whether they sell them on for a profit and then can buy more players to come in or things like that. You just see, teams have to become smarter at using all the information that's out there about players and teams and things like that. Players that are overachieving at lower teams that you can get for a good price. And I think, a lot of the sort of smaller teams have done a really good job at getting those players. And for quite a few of them, especially Leicester, they've been able to retain quite a few of their better players. Like initially they lost Kante and Mahrez and stuff like that, but more recently they still managed to keep sort of Vardy and Schmeichel and things like that, that sort of the core of their team that's kept them going.
See, I think in the past with that, as you were saying, like the teams are able to keep players, right? But I think if you go back to that era of 2006 to about 2008, maybe a bit before that, there were the four teams and the best players did want to just play for those four teams, right? Whereas now you see the likes of Leicester, Tottenham, who aren't traditionally in that top four, but those teams are now challenging for the Champions League spots, which is probably the most important competition to any player, right?
Yeah, definitely.
A club competition anyway. And so if they have the chance to do that at the club they're already at, I think a lot of players are inclined to stay at that team, right?
No, I think it's definitely, there are a lot of incentives and like to staying with the team, because you see a lot of like changes in the top four that teams can like maybe be inspired by less and think that they can, like, players can stay with their team and win a trophy with them. So I think, some players are thinking that if they stay and get the reward of winning a trophy with their sort of club that supported them all the way through, then they'll get an even sort of sweeter taste at the end. Whereas before, if they didn't think that there was that possibility of them not even making top four or like they're challenging for trophies and stuff, then it probably would have been better to move on to a bigger club where you might have a better chance of winning.
Yeah, exactly. But you go back, I'd say you go back to sort of the financial aspect of it, right? Where, young players who play for their boyhood teams, their boyhood clubs, aren't necessarily wanting to move for money anymore.
Yeah.
There's still, that's still a factor, but a lot of them are just looking to play football, play for their clubs. And you only really see that from foreign players, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it sort of depends, because I think there's a whole thing of, I think with the media now as well, there's a lot of like high profile and like hype around the moves that like especially young players do. And so there's that big like risk that a lot of players have been criticized after a big move and stuff like that. And so if you're sort of settled and comfortable in a club where you're doing relatively well and your club is doing relatively well, it is quite a big risk to move to another club and potentially not succeed for you and your career could be over. So it's that thing of if you're doing well at a club and you see potential for that club to continue improving, then as sort of a young English player, you might think, better for me to stay here at least for a little while longer before upping sticks and taking that big risk.
Yeah, I'd agree. Like, even though we are seeing a couple of young players move internationally to the European, some big European teams, the likes of Jadon Sancho wouldn't have ever managed to do it here. because I don't think City would have given him the chance to.
Yeah, no, I think it would have been difficult for him to break into the Man City team as it is now.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so moving on from that, we've obviously seen quite a lot of volatility in that sort of top six in the European spots, right? And I know Kit's done a great job. For my listeners, Kit's done a great job in pulling out a whole load of data on sort of the positions of the table and like the gaps between teams. So I'll give it right over to you. You can explain a bit and sort of just talk about how it's changed.
Yeah. So one of the first things like I wanted to look at was whether the sort of teams within the top four were more settled back then than they are now. And that was one of the first things I found that they sort of were when you consider the teams that finished within the top four the most regularly, which were Man U, Arsenal, Liverpool, and Chelsea. They out of the sort of because there are four top four spots every season, and we look at sort of the 10 seasons between that finished from 2000 to 2001 to the 2009-2010 season. 35 out of the 40 available places within that decade were taken up by those top four teams. So that's sort of 87.5% of the possible places taken up. And so there were a few occasions where Leeds, Newcastle, Everton, and Tottenham managed to squeeze in for sort of a single season or two. But generally, those sort of four teams just really dominated all the top four positions at that point. Whereas in the sort of more recent decade, it's only the top four teams that have finished the most times in the top four have been Man City, Chelsea, United, Man United, and Arsenal. And those teams have only taken 29 out of the 40 spots.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot more volatile now than it was before.
Yeah. And I know there's a few stats like the gap between, fourth and sixth and fourth and relegation. And they have increased actually over the time, which might suggest that the good teams are getting better and the, poorer teams are getting worse in the league. But I feel like it may be a bit skewed by the last 3 years where, the team who won the league, so Man City and Liverpool, they scored 100 points, 98 and 99. And those are just huge figures, aren't they?
Yeah. No, I think the thing that we see with like the stats is that actually the gap between sort of first and fourth hasn't really there's obviously been variation between seasons and stuff like that, but overall, like the average number of points between the two hasn't changed much. And the points between fourth and sixth, those have stayed quite. So the average points that the top six are getting hasn't really changed loads between the teams. But then, there's sort of bigger gaps between those top six teams and sort of the bottom or like the rest kind of thing, which shows that even though there is more changes between the teams in the top six, those sort of top six or seven or eight teams might be pulling away from the rest of the league with that sort of consistency that they have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was. So I had a look at some stats as well, and I managed to find some quite intriguing stats about transfers, right? And I feel like transfers, we've mentioned them, can play a huge factor in this, right? Because you have the likes of your Leicesters, your Wolves, who've recruited really smartly, but you also have the likes of Man City, United, and Chelsea, who go out and spend the big bucks, don't they? And it's quite interesting. I think the thing that we need to look at more is, a player leaving a club. So I have an incredible stat for you here, which I think it's incredible, right? Because it's quite a massive change in terms of, league position. But in 2013 and 14 season, Liverpool finished second. That was their season where they got ever so close to the title with Luis Suarez. And then he had his big move to Barcelona.
Yeah.
But in that season, he actually had a 43% goal involvement. That's big numbers, right? He leaves the season after they finish sixth. And that's the impact of one big player, right? Similarly with Hazard last year, moving. Chelsea were lucky to get fourth, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it was right it was last day of the season that they managed to get fourth.
Yeah.
So.
Another case is Van Persie in his final Arsenal season had a 57% goal involvement. Arsenal failed to replace him as a striker pretty much ever since, maybe up until the last 2-3 years max. And you can clearly see how one big transfer out can affect a team if there's no recruitment or, as you said, Leicester have done it really well. They sold Mahrez and Kante, but they've brought in, equally as good players and not for as much money.
No, I think it's that decision that when a big player leaves for a lot of money, the club has to make a decision whether they try and buy sort of just they use all the money for a direct replacement, or whether they use it to sort of strengthen the squad. And so I think, you see like different clubs have tried different tactics, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't. And I think, it's like with Bale leaving Tottenham, it took quite a long time for him to be replaced, and they seem to, in that case, buy quite a few players to just try and improve their squad while not directly replacing him and his goals and his goal contributions. And I think it was a similar case with Liverpool as well, that I think it's hard to find direct replacements for players. So when they do leave and you're sort of trying to decide what to do with that money that you've got, but then we've seen sort of Arsenal and Liverpool when they sold Coutinho for a large amount of money. They didn't spend it on a replacement for Coutinho, instead focused on a goalkeeper and the centre back in Van Dijk and Alisson, and that worked wonders for them.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of decisions to be made when you do sell a big important player that's sort of a focus of your team, as to whether to just buy one player in the same position or to change it up.
Yeah, and I guess the movement of players there has just made it a lot more equal.
Yeah.
It's meant that, you can't just go out and buy the world's most expensive player or one of the most expensive players and automatically get into the top four, win the league. Like Arsenal spent 70 million on Nicola Pepe, but he hasn't really done anything. And so that just shows that you can spend, 10 million that you receive for a 50 million pound player and still get sort of nearabouts the same results.
Yeah.
But that brings me to the question of, going back from that era to this era and the competitiveness of the sort of top of the league. What do you think is better for the Premier League?
I think it's hard. It's hard to say, because obviously, as a Man United fan, I'm inclined to say that the previous decade was better. The sort of in between 2000 2010 was better than this one, because we won the Premier League sort of most of the season. But I think it does seem to be sort of a bit of a better time, in that you don't know. You do know a bit, but there's no certainty as to who's going to finish top four at the end of the season. So I think for a lot of clubs and a lot of fans, there's a bit of like nervousness and excitement in terms of, are we going to be able to make it into it? Like, have we bought the right players and all that sort of stuff? So I think there's that bit of, like, for the clubs that were maybe traditionally top four teams that don't have that certainty, it's a bit worse, because they prefer just to know that they're going to finish as one of the top three, top four teams every season. But I think for maybe fans in general, it's just a bit maybe more exciting time to be a Premier League team and a Premier League player.
Yeah. Like you said, I guess it's more exciting for the teams in the top half than the bottom.
Yeah.
Because, there's teams like Bournemouth. I'd never, about 3 or 4 years ago, I wouldn't say they're a relegation side. They were a solid mid-table side. Likewise with Watford. But, we've seen that they can both go down with just one bad season, really. And I guess that's sort of the bad thing for the teams at the lower half. But as a fan of a team that tends to be sort of top six generally for the last 20 plus years, I'd say it's exciting because it could mean that we could finish anywhere from 6th to, first, but obviously Arsenal aren't going to finish first. So, so anywhere from 6th to like 3rd, I'd say. But yeah, that's just, I think that's a good progression for the league.
Yeah.
It's allowed, even Aston Villa this season, they've had a bit of investment in the right areas, and it's allowed them to, push through. They are traditionally a big club, right? Like, you consider the Leeds, the Aston Villas, the Newcastles, those big clubs. And it's allowed them to sort of reinstate their tier, their status in the Premier League.
No, I think when I was sort of looking through the sort of stats for the sort of decade between sort of 2000 and 2010, you did see like there was occasions where sort of Newcastle, the team with Kabay, Tiote, Dunbar and Papis Damassise, like teams like that, and the Aston Villa team with Dogbia and stuff like that, teams like that were making it up to sort of 6th or 5th in the Premier League, and so having those sort of really good seasons that we see like Aston Villa having now, or Wolves or Leicester having. But I think it's just because before, with especially at Man U and Arsenal, you had that stability of Sir Alex Ferguson and Arsene Wenger. You sort of knew that no matter how the season started or was going, you were going to end up in that sort of maybe title race or in that top 4 conversation kind of thing. Whereas now I think for like those teams for the teams below to get in, I think it is potentially to break into the top 6 is a bit harder with Man City and Tottenham sort of strengthening, but also there's a lot less stability at Man U, Arsenal, probably Chelsea at the moment. So that means that it's a lot like harder. Those teams are sort of dropping down into a potential like having to fight a lot more for their position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And with the stability thing, we see that sort of most managers don't stay at clubs for longer than maybe 3-4 years, right? Because I've mentioned this in a previous podcast about how, clubs are looking for those short-term wins. There's no longer that thing of we're going to build a club for the next 10 years. Because if that was the case, for example, Pochettino wouldn't have been sacked from Tottenham.
Yeah.
Mourinho's moved to about 17 different clubs in the UK alone. So, it is about stability. And when we had the likes of Ferguson, Wenger, David Moyes at Everton consistently finished 5th.
Yeah, no, I think it's that thing, like even as a sort of Man U fan, that at the beginning and quite a lot of the time throughout his, probably even earlier this season, there were points where I was talking about like wanting a new manager in and stuff like that. But I think you see now sort of the club is stuck with him and with sort of potentially reaping the rewards of that. So I think that's been something that it's like whether you do stay with a manager, whether Chelsea choose to stay with Lampard now or not, as to whether sort of like it could potentially be that he stays if he's given a few more seasons to stay, and then he could turn Chelsea back into a consistent sort of team that challenges for the league. But it's very hard to make those decisions.
Yeah, 100%. And that's the thing. Like, it's how we can get back to maybe that sort of consistency. Or as a fan, as a Man United fan, would you like to see that volatility remain in the Premier League?
I think it's another thing that adds that bit of like excitement or difference to the Premier League. But I think you just see with the money that's involved in being in the Champions League and then being in the Europa League and then not qualifying for any, and then just being in the Premier League in general. I think it's it's like, sort of hundreds of millions of pounds that are sort of just making these decisions.
Yeah.
So I think potentially in some situations it would be nice to see managers stay longer or not. But I think if you're a team that's potentially going to get relegated or not qualify for the Champions League or stuff like that, and your manager seems to be the cause of that, and you change manager and it all goes well, then I think that's when it's sort of hard to decide whether it's better to stick or twist.
Yeah, that is true. So moving on, we've spoken about, there being a top 6 now, top 7 maybe. But in the next, say, 10 years, could you envisage more than a top 6, 7? Like maybe a top 10, like a solid, any of the top 10 could get into Champions League spots?
I think it will be difficult to have many more teams, just because I think of the money that you will generally for the teams in the top 6, 7, the money that they're spending in order to stay in the sort of Champions League or to get into the Champions League or the Europa League, because there are only, well, for now, there's the 6 spots available for British teams in Europe, that I think it'll be a big risk for teams below that to continue spending money, and whether they can retain those players if they've made it in once, to stay in. But potentially with the emergence of the new sort of Europa League, the second Europa League competition, if there are those extra points, and depending on how much money is available for that, then you could see, the teams that are sort of below fighting to get into that competition rather than aiming for the Champions League. They'll aim for that and or the Europa League.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that is true. And I struggle to see anywhere near as much money in the second Europa League, because outside of England and maybe Spain, you're not going to get any high caliber teams at all. So it will only really benefit the English teams, really.
Yeah, I think it will be. I think that for all the teams within it, I think it will be a very good competition, because there's that, like, winning a European trophy, no matter what it is, really is like a big thing for any club.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, for if one of the like traditional sort of big 6 team was in there, then I don't think they might take it as seriously or something. But a team like Aston Villa or Southampton, teams like, or even Wolves that are like doing well, I think all those teams would like do really well, and I think all the fans would pay to go see it because they want to see their team win trophies. And I think that'll be a similar thing for a lot of teams around Europe, especially like in the smaller leagues and stuff like that, that I think for them, having that chance of winning a European trophy or just playing other European teams, I think could have fans of small teams getting sort of very excited about and paying that money to be able to see their team, whether it's on television or in person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's fair. And if I flip that question over, could you envisage a top 4 again, like in the next 3 to 4 years? Because I feel like there is a gap between sort of the top 4 or 5 teams in the country and the next 3 or 4 at the moment. And
I think potentially, but I think a lot of it depends on like stability and stuff. Because you see, even with Liverpool struggling a bit this season, I think everyone, with like how well Klopp have been doing at Liverpool beforehand, there is a good chance that it's just a blip and they'll go back to dominating next season. But I think having those like teams and managers that can continually like sort of renew themselves and renew their teams to challenge trophies with making the right signings, and also with the amount of like video and like video statistics, all these things that are available for the top teams, everyone will have spent the entire sort of end of last season and beginning of like the gap between the two seasons, analysing Liverpool and how to beat them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that will just happen for all the sort of top four teams, that everyone will just look for a blueprint on how to beat them, and then they'll get beaten more than normal for that season, and then they might drop out of the top six, and then they'll have to change something and might be able to come back. But I just think, I can't really see there being four teams that completely sort of seal off the top four and make it their own.
Yeah, I think there's potentially, if you take sort of the positions in the table over the last 10 years, I think there's only one team that you can safely say is in the top four.
Yeah.
And that's Man City. They've been in the top four every season for the last 10 seasons. And they've built a club now which is, going to last. Probably in the near future, most likely going on from that, but they're going to last, and they're going to spend big and for years to come now, aren't they?
Yeah, I think if they continue to and continue to have the quality of just the squad in general that they have now, then I think they'll consistently be. And I think you sort of see that they were the team that every season in the last year has been in the top four, and then out of the 10 seasons, Chelsea have been in 7 times, Man United 6, Arsenal 6, and then Tottenham 5 and Liverpool 5, and then Leicester once. And so there's that thing of they've been consistently within that top four, so they're like a top 4 team now. But then out of the other ones, there's just a couple of like times difference where they've either qualified or not. And so I just think there's going to be a lot of that sort of leapfrogging as a player or a manager has a really good season, a team shoots up and could win the Premier League or finish second, third, sort of in the top 4. And then if they've a lot of injuries or their manager has a bad season, then they could quite easily drop out of the top 4.
Yeah,
so I think
true.
There'll continue to be a lot between sort of all the other sort of 5-6 teams other than Man City. I think there'll just continue to be a lot of movement between them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's heavily again down to finances.
Yeah.
But yeah, just to round off this whole conversation about the top 4 versus the current top 6, top 8, I just want your sort of list of the top 7 teams this season.
As in who I think is best, or who I prefer?
As in who you think is best, and let's make it a prediction for the title and spots, but at the end of the season.
Okay, so I'd probably say I think Man City will win it, because I just think the Pep Guardiola factor and their squad. I think they've got this De Bruyne injury, which could cause them problems, but I think they have the quality in the rest of their team to maybe do it. But I think it will be very tight.
100%, they have the quality to. De Bruyne is a player of his own class, right? But they have so many players that can take his place. Yeah, I agree with that. Man City, a phenomenal side. And
then I think Liverpool will be second. Like, it pains me to say this as a United fan, but I think they're going through a blip at the moment that their players just aren't scoring, which they're not really conceding loads of goals or anything like that. They're just not scoring, which I think with Jota, who will eventually come back and stuff like that, I think at some point they'll get out of this sort of funk that they're in, and then they'll just win games again.
I've gone with Liverpool at 4th, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Big shout. So come the end of the season, I will be re-reviewing this podcast.
And then 3rd, I'd say Man United. I think with the way that, I think this is a massive surprise to me as well as a lot of other Man U fans, but I think, obviously, I'd love to do better than that, but I think if our players keep performing the way that they are, then I think there's no reason why we can't get into the top 1 or 2. But I just think with the games against the other top 6 in the Premier League. We haven't won many of those this season. We've done really well against everyone else, but yeah. So I just think I don't think we'll win enough of those big games to make it into the top two.
I had again United as second, so
Okay.
I mean that you might enjoy that one. You might enjoy hear me saying that.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And then I'll probably go Tottenham third. Sorry, fourth. That's what I mean. Yeah, fourth. I just think again, like Mourinho as a manager, Kane and Son, and like with how some of the other players like Ndombele and Sissoko and like their fullbacks as well have been playing quite well this season. So yeah.
I'll give you my third spot, which fills out it. I've gone with Leicester. I watched was it Maddison's interview the other day, and I think by the sounds of it and the way they play, they have so much team chemistry, and you know they have the ambition that some of the other big clubs don't.
Yeah,
it's not, you know, these Leicester players aren't just playing you know, quality football against the top six, which some other top six teams are doing, but they're you know, outplaying all the smaller teams as well, the teams in the bottom half, and they're putting performances in, they're scoring a load of goals, and they're defensively very solid. So
yeah,
it's they're there, and I feel like they'll be a dark horse, but they shouldn't be.
Yeah,
you know,
no,
they shouldn't be written off.
Yeah, they definitely have the quality to challenge. But I think for me, I think this Vardy injury that he's just got, I think that will test them a bit, because I think he, even though like he has been scoring quite a bit this season, but he hasn't been sort of their only scorer. But I think just the work that he does in their attack a lot of the time allows other people to, because maybe defenses focus on him, it gives space for other people and stuff like that. Whereas I think when he's not playing, people worry about whoever's playing up front for them less, and so there's less space for players like Barnes and Maddison and those players behind.
Yeah,
but I think there's definite. If they finished in the top four, I wouldn't be particularly surprised. But I think they're for me. Yeah, I'd say they're probably fifth. That it's just outside.
Okay, and then sixth and seventh for you.
I'll probably go Arsenal, then Chelsea. But I think, there are like other teams in that conversation, like Aston Villa and Southampton. And I think Arsenal are on a good run at the moment, but then again, they could just implode and, drop down the table again. I think after that top five, I think it's very sort of changeable as to who could be there at the end of the season.
Do you see any other teams aside from Arsenal and Chelsea filling those sixth and seventh spots?
I think like Southampton have been very good this season. I think they, have been sort of, they could possibly, if they keep doing as well as they're doing, there's chance. Aston Villa as well. I think they do have a lot of real quality in their team.
Mm-hmm.
But that will just depend on whether they can keep it up. I don't think Wolves will be able to do it with like the fact that they've lost their two biggest goal scorers for pretty much the whole season, and Jota moving to Liverpool, and Jimenez, getting the fractured skull, and they have just signed Willian Jose to go up front, but I still don't think that it will all settle in and work quick enough for them to make it back up.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, that seems about right. I mean, Everton were flying at the start of the season, but they've tailed off, and again, you just see them finishing sort of 8th, 9th, or 10th, really. Yeah. Okay, so as usual, to end off, Kit will be taking part in our quiz segment. It's called the Guessing a Specialist Test. A bit of a tongue twister sometimes, but it's essentially where Mastermind meets the speed of Top Gear, right? And Yeah, Kit's decided to go for a sport which we haven't seen before on this quiz segment, and it's rugby. And his particular topic is England men's rugby post the 2015 World Cup.
Yeah.
He challenged me a bit there with finding some questions, but yeah, we can kick off whenever you're ready.
Yeah, I think I'm ready. I'm aiming for answering them all quickly, and then even if I get some wrong, then hopefully I'll be, but like at least mid-table.
Yeah, fair shout. Okay. Let's go. So in 3, 2, 1. So who is England's current captain?
Owen Farrell.
In the last Six Nations, how many games did England win?
5.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. With 3 tries apiece, name one of England's top scorers in the 2019 World Cup.
Johnny May.
Yeah. From the current England squad, who is the most capped player?
Owen Farrell.
It's Ben Youngs.
Ah, yeah.
Where is the current manager from?
Australia.
Yeah. Which Englishman was the last to score a hat-trick in the Six Nations? This was in Feb 2019 in a win against France.
Johnny May.
Yeah. Where's the 2023 World Cup being held?
France.
Yeah. England had a record win run of how many games between 2015 and 17?
18.
Yeah. To the nearest 10,000, what is England's national stadium capacity?
82?
I mean, yeah, that's bang on. And with the limits to sport in 2020, how many games did England play over the calendar year?
9?
It was just 5 in the Six Nations.
Oh, okay.
Okay, let me work that out. Sorry, 1.
Wait.
You only got 1 wrong there. No, sorry, 2.
Yeah.
Which means your total is 1 minute and 43 seconds, which I believe puts you in top 3.
Okay, yeah. I think the last one, it was more games than that, but I think I still got it wrong. Because there was the Autumn Nations Cup at the end as well. But
that's my bad.
No, I think it was about 12 games or something like that. I don't know. But
well, I'll review that question. There'll be a bit of a VAR check.
Yeah.
And I'll get back to you. But with that being said, it was great having a chat with you about, the future of the Premier League, the past and the present. And look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you. That was really good to be on.
This is Kit Lawson, and we are the Commentary Box Podcast. Check us out on Instagram. This will be the first YouTube video as well. So check us out on there. We've got Spotify, Apple, and Google if you want to listen. Adios.
See ya.